Good afternoon, everyone. The Source Water Collaborative and the Southeastern Partnership for Forests and Water would like to welcome you to our webinar today. Source Water Protection Using Clean Water State Revolving Funds. This webinar is part of a series called Stronger Together, Landscape Partnerships for Drinking Water Protection. You might have already attended our previous webinars about forest and water partnerships and about tools and resources to advance collaboration. They're on our Source Water Collaborative's YouTube channel and also on our webinars and resources page of the Source Water Collaborative website. And we'll put a link in chat, hopefully for both of those, and in our notes so you can access them. So now we're going to turn to the Source Water Collaborative slide. I'm Sylvia Malm. I'm the Senior Advisor for Source Water Protection with the Groundwater Protection Council. And I also am working in this webinar and with our fellow planners in supporting the Source Water Collaborative. We are today, the Source Water Collaborative is a national organization. We have 31 members dedicated to advancing drinking water source protection. You can see all our members on this slide, and you can find more information at sourcewatercollaborative.org. This year, we're celebrating 20 years of collaboration. The Southeastern Partnership is joining us in this effort. Kathy Hawes is the coordinator of the partnership, and it's a regional initiative that fosters collaboration to conserve and manage private forest lands for drinking water source protection. Today's webinar, Source Water Protection Using the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, will help you understand the opportunities available to access SRF funding for a wide variety of projects beneficial to source water protection. We'll follow up this webinar with slides, links, and a recording. And we hope to hear and learn from you. As you watch this, please post your questions and comments, share your stories in the chat, and also let us know what additional information we can provide that will make this a more tangible endeavor for you and your partners. We'll begin today with a brief overview of the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, highlighting some similarities and differences. Then we'll have a deep dive into the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and its opportunities for source water protection. We'll pause for Q&A, and then we'll hear how Oregon's Source Water Protection Program and SRS Clean Water SRF Office have worked together to achieve mutual goals, and how this effort has resulted in real on-the-ground achievements of multiple source water protection projects benefiting local communities. Please use the chat throughout, as I said, to pose your questions about the presentation, and we'll do our best to cover those during the Q&A sessions or to provide answers in our follow-up email. We'll begin with an overview of the state revolving funds with Allison Souders and Deirdre White. Deirdre will be going first. Well, actually, I think Allison's going first. Sorry. Allison is a financial analyst with the EPA's Office of Wastewater Management. She's been a member of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund branch since 2017, where she leads outreach efforts to broaden the understanding and application of clean water SRF funds. Deirdre White is a program manager with the Association of Drinking Water Administrators, where she helps state drinking water programs with source water protection, as well as other issues like Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act integration, nutrient pollution, and PFAS. She's helped lead the Source Water Collaborative since it began in 2006 and served as its chair from 2022 to 2025. Let's start with the basics about state revolving funds. Allison?
Thank you, Sylvia. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison. I work for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund at EPA headquarters, like Sylvia mentioned. So I'll give a quick overview of the state revolving funds. There is both a Clean Water State Revolving Fund and a Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. These programs were set up to provide government assistance that is intended to reduce the cost of critical public health and environmental infrastructure. The SRFs, the state revolving funds, SRFs, replaced the construction grants program in the 80s and 90s with the state revolving funds to provide in perpetuity financing for water quality infrastructures in every state in Puerto Rico. The next slide is kind of a flow of funds, how the programs operate. There are 51 CWSRF and 51 DWSRF programs in each state in Puerto Rico that operate like banks. Here at the left, Congress appropriates funding to EPA each year for the SRF programs. EPA awards capitalization grants or seed money to each state that is matched at 20% by the state. The assets are used to make low interest loans and provide other types of assistance to borrowers for eligible water quality projects. Funds are then repaid to the SRF over terms as long as 30 to 40 years and are recycled to fund other water quality and public health projects, continuing the revolving cycle. Some states do provide additional project funding by leveraging, but not every state. That's a quick overview of how the program works. The next slide, like I mentioned, there are 51 drinking water and 51 clean water SRFs, each state in Puerto Rico. Administration of the clean water and drinking water SRF varies. Okay. Varies by state. So some states house both programs in a single agency, while others might split them up between different entities. For example, a state environmental or natural resources department might run the clean water SRF, while a health department or an infrastructure finance authority might manage the drinking water SRF in your particular state. So it's important to get to know where your clean water and drinking water programs are housed in your state and learn about the various policies and procedures that they're implementing. So the SRFs are versatile and reliable sources of funding. A few benefits include that they can fund a wide variety of project dollar sizes with no federal minimum or maximum loan amount, and they have the ability to cover up to 100% of total project costs, or to be used as grant match. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Funding can be paired with other sources or can be used as interim financing while waiting for another financing source that may take longer to secure. The SRFs offer attractive terms and will often work with their borrowers to structure debt to help work with the community. Attractive terms include extended loan terms up to 30 or 40 years, interest as low as 0% to market rate, loan forgiveness or grants available for applications meeting state affordability criteria or pursuing sustainable projects, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. And repayments do not begin until 12 months after project completion, so you don't have to start repayment before the improvements are operational. So the next slide is just a quick, how do I apply for SRF funding? So develop your plans, identify your needs, and make sure to engage with your state SRF program early. Become involved in your state's SRF public review process. Each state provides an intended use plan every year discussing which shows what they're going to fund, the type of projects, and how they're meeting federal requirements. So it's important to look that up, and then you can understand the program eligibilities and have further conversations before applying. And yeah.
Thanks, Allison. I am Deirdre White with ASDWA, or the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, and I'm going to provide some more background on states' use of the drinking water SRF set-asides for source water protection. Next. For those of you who don't know, ASDWA is a national nonprofit association located in the Washington, D.C. area in Arlington, Virginia. Our members are the drinking water program administrators for the 50 states, territories, Navajo Nation, and D.C., and they are the people who implement the Safe Drinking Water Act regulations to ensure compliance, but they also provide technical assistance and funding, such as with the drinking water SRF and the set-asides. They also coordinate with many partners to support source water protection. Next. Allison alluded to this, but just to give a little bit more detail, the state drinking water programs are located sometimes within different state government agencies. For the drinking water program specifically, there are 16 of them that are in departments of health. Some are in combined departments of health or environment and natural resources. And then the majority of them are in departments of environment or natural resources. We even have one, South Dakota, that's in the Department of Agriculture. And this is sometimes different than the state drinking water SRF program, such as the Infrastructure Financing Agency, that can be either located within the drinking water program itself or can be separated. So just a note there, depending on the state, it may be different structured or maybe structured differently. Next. The 1996 Safe Drinking Water Act amendments created the Drinking Water SRF and established the state source water assessment programs. There are two different phases of these assessment programs that were required by these amendments. One is the assessment phase, and the other is the protection phase. And they include these 4 steps that are listed here under the bullets here: the delineation of the source water protection areas, the inventory of potential contamination sources, conducting an analysis of vulnerability to those contamination sources, and then also doing public outreach. Next. The Safe Drinking Water Act itself has a multi-barrier approach, and this is primarily it's primarily based on treatment, but it also includes source water protection to ensure that drinking water is safe from those potential contaminants I just mentioned. It also includes requirements for systems to monitor and comply with regulatory standards and communicate with their customers. Next. So for this slide, I wanted to show how the drinking water SRF loans are different than the set-asides. So the drinking water SRF has all of these different set-asides that you can see in the box at the bottom left of your screen. The 4% for administration, technical assistance, you can see the 2%, 10%, 15%. This is different than the Clean Water SRF program. And the state drinking water programs use these SRF set-asides to actually do many different types of activities, including funding their staff. So I provided some details about the 2 different set-asides here at the bottom left. On the right, for the state program management, the 10% set-aside, you can see that in addition to some of the other activities like the program administration, capacity development, operator certification, that technical assistance can also be provided for source water protection. So state drinking water programs use this piece of the set-aside as well as the 15% local set-aside to provide, for that one, you can do loans and grants. They can do loans and grants to water systems for source water protection plans and projects. They can do the area delineations and assessments, and they can also provide loans for land acquisition and conservation easements. Next. This is an example from the state of Maine where they were able to use their drinking water SRF set-asides and clean water SRF to do this program pilot. And for this pilot, it was just a 1-year project, and it resulted in a roadmap for how to best use SRF dollars in Maine. They document the information about the pilot project that might be helpful for some of you, and they also include a detailed plan for utilization of the SRF funds specifically for the Saco Watershed Collaborative Action Tasks. So I provided the link to this at the bottom, this report at the bottom of the slide, and you're going to hear many more examples from the state of Oregon today. I just wanted to share this one with you so you can see some of the differences in different states. Next. So what about treatment? Because that's really what the SRFs are focused on, is loans for infrastructure for water systems, and for the Clean Water SRF, wastewater systems. Though source water protection may be a better and less expensive option. And for those loans, the SRF programs typically require an alternatives analysis as either a standalone item or as part of, for example, a state's, a water system's preliminary engineering report. And so these require the water systems to actually look at other alternatives like source water instead of putting in some new infrastructure or treatment. The other things that water systems might be able to do is to drill new wells or blend sources, but mainly the SRF is focused on treatment. And my purpose of this slide is just to show you that there are some alternatives for source water protection that could be less costly. Next. This slide is just to demonstrate that even though states have these set asides, they also have a lot of different priorities. And so different states have different priorities for spending these. And some of them are focused on immediate public health threats. Like, for example, if a water system is in violation for a contaminant that's going to cause an immediate public health threat, versus having some source water protection actions put in place that are not mandatory at the federal level. The states also use the drinking water SRF set-asides, as I mentioned before, for funding their staff. And though that's an eligible activity or a possible funding stream for their staff, there are many states that do not spend as much in this area, depending again on their priorities. So the state drinking water programs, state source water protection programs, I kind of use those terms interchangeably. They may only have one person in the state that's working on source water protection, or even part of one person's job that is spent on source water protection. There are other ways that states also incentivize source water protection through drinking water SRF loans. So for example, they would give priority points to water systems that have a source water protection plan, or if they have activities that they're conducting, they would get extra priority points to get them their drinking water SRF loan if they're conducting these types of activities. And there is a link, or you'll have it in the slides, but this is the name of the report that EPA did that talks about how states are using all of their drinking water SRF set-asides across the board for different types of funding, or for funding different types of activities. And next. This slide is just to show that the SRF funding has not been particularly reliable over the last six years. The amounts have changed considerably, and so if you look over on the far left, you see the FY 2021 funding, where there were no earmarks, or what we call community directed spending or congressionally directed spending projects under the drinking water SRF. And here I've also provided the clean water SRF and earmark amounts. So those set aside amounts that the drinking water program had would have been higher that year for being able to fund some of those activities I mentioned. And then in the following years, 22 through 24, you can see that those projects took away from that base funding that the state had for their drinking water SRF and clean water SRF. But in the case of the drinking water SRF, that amount of set-asides that they could use for the other activities and source water protection. In 2025, we had a continuing resolution, so the earmarks didn't come through, but they did come back in 2026. And then in 2022, we had the IIJA funding. This is Infrastructure Improvements and Jobs Act that provided additional funding over that time. But what I don't show here is that for FY 2027, that funding will be gone, although states are holding on to some of it to be able to continue to fund projects through the next few years. That the appropriated funding from Congress will be less coming up. And that's going to be a real consideration for how states prioritize their funding for different types of activities for FY 2027 and moving forward, unless we get another potential appropriation like this. Next. And while the federal EPA, the Safe Drinking Water Act, does not require source water protection, there are some states that have source water protection planning requirements. So I've listed those here. I'm not going to go through each of these, but you can see the color differences. So the blue purple color, if it comes through your screen okay, are the states that require plans for both surface water and groundwater systems. The light blue North Carolina requires source water protection plans now for just surface water systems. The orange is just for groundwater, and then the others are for part of another type of plan. And this for Connecticut and Washington is actually part of what's called a public water supply plan. And Delaware has its own requirement for source water protection planning as part of the community or county land use plans. And this is to say that because they have these requirements, they are going to prioritize some of this funding for source water protection that sometimes the other states might not be able to if they don't have these regulatory triggers, the federal regulatory requirements. Next. This is my last slide. I just wanted to share these two reports. I put screenshots of the covers here on the right-hand side. They're from EPA, and they have some more information about using the drinking water SRF set-aside funding for source water protection. So I encourage you to check those out. And then we also have the list of state source water contacts here through the link on the left, and you can reach out to me anytime as well through my email. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Deidre. So, oh, sorry. Cool. So I'll go ahead and give an overview of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund now. So just to touch quickly on the first slide, who is eligible? So eligibility varies by project type, by state and project type. So all of the entities on this slide, communities, nonprofits, tribal governments, watershed groups, etc., are eligible for CWSRF funding at the federal level, though states may prioritize and not fund all of these types of entities. For instance, some states don't fund private systems. Thanks, Kyra, for putting all the links into the chat there. So you can confirm eligibility by taking a look at your state Clean Water SRF's website, which is at the link in this PowerPoint, and we'll send these out afterwards. There will be an intended use plan on that site that spells out the program goals and operations and what type of projects they're funding, including like what type of projects get priority points. So that's a good place to take a look at and see if you as an entity are eligible and if the type of project that you're funding is eligible. So the types of projects that are eligible for Clean Water State Revolving Fund financing are listed here on the screen. There's 12 statutory project eligibilities that come from the Clean Water Act. They include the construction of publicly owned treatment works, which is what traditionally the fund has been known for, and a lot of the financing goes for wastewater utilities, treatments, upgrades, repairs, but it's also available since the beginning of the program inception. Clean Water State Revolving funds have been able to finance non-point source projects through something called the 319 Non-Point Source Management Program, as well as National Estuary Program projects, NEP, if you hear me reference that, that's National Estuary Program. So any project or project type on a 319 non-point source plan or 320 National Estuary Plan in a state is eligible for Clean Water SRF financing, as well as what you see on the screen here. We have many different fact sheets on our website describing how different states are financing these practices and what is eligible specifically within each. So we've got land conservation, ag best management practices, groundwater and surface water quality protection. I have a wildfire risk management example coming up, stormwater, etc. So we also have a source water specific fact sheet you can take a look at. So the Green Project Reserve is something established under the American Recovery and Investment Act of 2009. Basically, states need to make sure that at least 10% of their seed money coming from EPA, that's the capitalization grant that I mentioned earlier that gets given to the state programs every year, that 10% of that grant money will go to projects that address green infrastructure, water and energy efficiency, or other environmentally innovative activities. Again, each state is responsible for identifying and approving those projects that qualify. So you would find information on that state's website. Allie will talk about that a little bit later, how Oregon does this. And there's also the potential for principal forgiveness, which is grant-like funds associated with many of these project types. So with the Clean Water SRF, it is, of course, a loan program. So entities need to identify a repayment source when they're coming in for financing. So it's challenging oftentimes for source water protection or like non-point source land conservation projects to come up with a repayment a repayment source. So some of these examples that we've seen over time, special assessment fees, timber harvest revenues, stormwater district fees, park revenues, hunting license fees, stormwater utilities, of course, and carbon credit revenues. So this picture actually here is one of our case studies. The Yurok tribe in California received financing to do some land conservation on land there. And until the timber harvest was going to be ready, they put forward carbon credits as their repayment stream. So CWSRF programs have considerable flexibility to set the conditions for loan assistance. So many programs have become creative in the ways that they're reaching borrowers that may not have an easily identified repayment stream or be eligible, like or be able to take out a loan for themselves, basically. So these are some of the innovative financing mechanisms that many of the states have come up with. I'll talk about sponsorship. Programmatic financing is something where you can, many states will work with you and you can have a large loan, and over time you will just draw down that loan. You don't have to come in for several loans for several projects. It's several projects in one loan. So there's just creative ways that states can work with you to finance more than just wastewater and projects. So wastewater protection. So I'll talk about sponsorship lending in this slide. The CWSRF lending in sponsorship combines assistance to both gray infrastructure and source water protection or non-point source type projects into one loan. They bundle the treatment works project with a non-treatment works project. A municipality or community, let's say a wastewater utility, receives a loan and they get a reduced interest rate as compensation for also undertaking or sponsoring the non-treatment works project. This allows the municipalities or communities to address pressing watershed restoration and protection priorities, and then without placing repayments responsibility on, say, a conservation group that's trying to protect land that may not otherwise have a dedicated repayment source to get a loan to do that work with. So that is exactly what happened. The next slide. Ohio EPA started their first sponsorship program and has served as a model for others. They dedicate a minimum funding stream each year for protection through their Water Resource Restoration Sponsorship Program, or WRRSP. So for example, this project, the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District was the sponsoring entity, and they received a 0.06% discount on their standard below market interest rate to finance four wetland restoration projects, including this purchase of the 87-acre Medina Marsh. And it actually saved the sewer district more than $430,000 in interest payments, and they were able to sponsor those 4 conservation projects. So there are several states that have sponsorship programs, and we encourage others to look into this option. I'm sorry, the light just went out. Sorry about that. If I move, it turns back on. So here are just, I included some case studies from other states of source water protection type projects that are being financed. So this is an example of ag BMP. So several of our states fund agricultural BMPs with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund or a program within the CWSRF. In Virginia, they operate a ag BMP loan program through the DEQ that provides loans to farmers for ag BMPs, best management practices. This specific example, Garber Farms was experiencing severe erosion on their stream bank from overgrazing. That resulted in high bacterial and nutrient loads. So they worked with their local soil and water conservation district to draft a land management plan. Then they were able to use that to obtain a $230,000 no interest loan from DEQ in Virginia, Department of Environmental Quality, where the CWSRF is housed, for the full cost of the project until they received grant funding to repay the loan. So like I mentioned earlier, CWSRF repayments are not required until up to 12 months after the loan. So in this case for ag projects, a lot of times folks will use it for bridge or interim financing. You'll get the SRF loan, be able to use that as the project costs are incurred. And then when grant financing, USDA grant, whatever other dollars that you're going to use to repay the loan comes in, you can use that to repay the loan before incurring too much interest. So the next example is in our source water protection fact sheet. This is a great example of the drinking water and clean water state revolving funds working together. In this case, in Skagit, Washington, their public utility district was able to use a DWSRF grant from their set aside that Deidre gave her presentation on the set asides for drinking water. They used that to do property appraisal and some of the planning. And then they came in for a CWSRF loan with half principal forgiveness, so 50% grant-like funds to purchase the actual forest. And this is an example of the Water Infrastructure Financing Authority of Arizona, or WIFA. They launched the Arizona Wildfire Thinning and Wildfire Restoration Project in 2019, which was financed in part with a CWSRF loan. It built on the success of the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project, a robust watershed partnership that formed in response to catastrophic wildfires that occurred in the area in 2010. So the city's plan, a key strategy of the city's plan was to undertake preventative forest management through forest thinning to mitigate the risk of another wildfire event. So many partners came together and WIFA provided the $6 million loan with $1 million in principal forgiveness to help the partnerships start engaging in these practices and modernized forest management. So like I mentioned before, how do I get started? Check with your drinking water and clean water state revolving funds in your state, check their intended use plans, give staff a call. There's contact information on EPA's website for each clean water and drinking water SRF. And of course, we're happy to answer any questions. I provided additional resources on the next slide with links when we share this, share the slides, and then contact information list. So thank you.
Thanks, Allison and Deirdre. In response to that recent question in the chat, yes, you will get these slides and the links will be live, so you'll be able to interact with them. So now we're going to move to Q&A. I didn't see any other questions in the chat, but maybe somebody else did. We had some questions that came in ahead of time with registration. And so that I wanted to just read the first one of those, and people can think about if you want to add other questions in the chat, please do so. The first question we got was, how do I find out if there are local water utilities that I could partner with?
Okay, that's a really good question. So for something like sponsorship, or if you're not an eligible entity for the Clean Water SRF, or you don't have a repayment source, it could be a really good idea to partner or contact your local water utilities. The EPA, actually, I didn't include this link. I'll put it in the chat. The EPA has a few databases like ECHO where you can look up based on maps where your closest utilities are, and that can be helpful in making those connections and trying to set up like kind of a watershed-based partnership instead of just one-off projects around your area.
I think, and the drinking water mapping application that EPA Source Water Program has might be useful too. Kyra, maybe you can put it in. Okay, I just saw a question come up. Let me just pull it back up. Does EPA maintain a database of the outcomes of the projects, or is it just narrative for each project?
We have an online portal where you can go in and see all of the project and financial information for each project entered by the state. We do not have a comprehensive database for all of the outcomes, but we do have a case studies portal that has many of the projects narratives again, but some quantitative information as well. And we have a public portal map that shows a map of all of the SRF projects.
Okay, thank you. Are those additional links we should put in the chat or send later?
Yep, I can grab them.
Great.
I can do it in a minute. And I can also provide, Maria, I see you asked to see examples of repayment via the environmental credits option. We have a few case studies on that, and it's included in, I believe, our land conservation fact sheet. So I'll link that in a second.
Okay, thank you. And then we also had a question, how do I find out if my project or entity is CWSRF eligible in my state? And I think you covered that, Allison. But we
Sorry, it's just lagging when I go to take off my audio. Right, so I would check your state's website and their intended use plan. We have Kyra just put in at 2:34, she put in the chat the clean water contacts and then the drinking water contacts at 2:35. So I would go to those websites, click on your state, and scroll to the intended use plan. It might be spelled out somewhere else on the website, but the intended use plan will always have that.
Thank you. And then could you elaborate more on how clean water SRF funds can be used for grant match?
Sure. Clean Water State Revolving Fund, like I mentioned, is the funds are revolving. So it's federally capitalized. The loans are made with those dollars, the federal dollars. But when the money comes back in and revolves back into the fund, it's no longer considered federal funding. So there's a portion of each state revolving fund that is eligible to be used to match grants. I have an example of that too. There was a stormwater project in Cocoa Beach, Florida, where we matched a grant. A community used the CWSRF funds to match a grant for their stormwater project at the local level.
And then we have two more questions that came in. May CWSRF funds be used to purchase land as a buffer to drinking water supply reservoirs?
I can't mention for your state or case, but in federally, yes, as long as there's a water quality impact, and you would check your states what they fund and what they're funding to know.
Okay, thank you. And I think this question may be for both of you. What are some strategies for states to cope with the expected unpredictability in SRF funding in future years, as well as the inherent vulnerability with the congressional appropriations process and diversion to congressionally directed spending, now called community grants?
I would say that, states are considering different possibilities for how they're going to fund their programs and also their loans. We've also been, ASDWA has also been talking with the states about thinking about working with Congress on the congressionally directed spending funding for communities, and maybe targeting those communities that aren't able to meet the federal SRF requirements. So there's a number of possibilities moving forward. We're always advocating for full funding of both of the SRFs, and it's kind of a wait and see right now just to figure out how we all can adapt and make sure that we're trying to take care of all the needs of our communities across the country, both for loans and for projects like this.
Thanks, Deirdre. And we have one more question, which I think might apply to other states as well. So I'm going to take that and then we'll turn to the next speaker. Currently in Florida, project loans are centered around infrastructure development and/or projects that support low-income municipalities. I work for a land trust focused on protecting lands within sensitive watershed areas via direct acquisition or conservation easements. While land conservation actively protects against non-point source pollution without improving or adding infrastructure, we are not eligible for Florida funding. Is there a way to circumvent this?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have an answer for that. I know that, through the drinking water SRF set asides, you could talk to your state drinking water program about opportunities for using those, or what they're using those funds for, and if they have a grant program. On the clean water SRF side, I don't know if you have any suggestions, Allison, but the Clean Water SRF is much more flexible in terms of being able to fund different types of projects. So it's really it's up to each state as to what they require for their funding. And it is different in every state. So, it's unclear if that is just a Florida specific issue or if there might be other ways to use the funding.
Yeah, that's a good answer, Deidre. I think the best answer to is to call Florida staff and let them know that you're interested in funding if you haven't already, because if states don't know that there's increased demand for these type of things, maybe they're just fine with funding wastewater projects. So I would probably contact your state, contact local water utilities, see if they're coming in for CWSRF money. Maybe they could add some funding for land conservation. But again, it's dependent on state rules and regulations, like Deidre mentioned.
Yeah, and Kyra put an example in
Yep.
the chat about the state of Vermont that they did make some legislative changes to allow land trusts to be eligible.
And would the sponsorship program be a model that Florida could look at or have a conversation about?
Sorry, what was that question, Sylvia?
As an add-on to that, I'm just wondering if the sponsorship programs that you talked about that other states have done, where the loan gets a lower interest rate and includes a project, maybe like land conservation.
Yeah, that would be something that you could bring up with the state and ask them if they've looked into doing something like that, or one-off versions of that if you could find a utility to partner with, maybe locally. Again, if it's allowed by the state and their regulations and statutes.
Okay, thank you both, and thank you for all the great questions. Now we're going to turn to our great team from Oregon and learn about how the state of Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality programs, the Drinking Water Program, the Drinking Water Source Protection Program, and the SRF program have developed a system of working together to get source water protection projects on the ground. First of all, Allie Miller is a program analyst with the Oregon Clean Water State Revolving Fund program and supporting clean water infrastructure investments throughout the state. Prior to joining DEQ, Allie worked in the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors, where she supported initiatives focused on environmental sustainability, natural resource management, and community resilience. Laura Johnson is a drinking water protection specialist also in DEQ, partnering with public water systems and communities to help them pursue drinking water source protection strategies. Laura has a professional and academic background in environmental science, geographic information systems, and stream ecology, and enjoys finding the common ground between ecosystem function and public health. Julie Harvey is a registered geologist with over 35 years experience in environmental assessment and protection. She's the Oregon Drinking Water Source Protection Program Coordinator, where she works with public water systems, governments, and other partners to develop local strategies for protecting drinking water sources. We're going to start with an overview from Julie. Thank you.
Excellent. You can just go ahead and move ahead on that. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of background on Oregon's program and then really turn it over to Ali and Laura, who are the experts in, moving this forward in Oregon and have so much of that program experience. Our program is a interagency partnership between our health authority, which is our drinking water SRF program manager, and DEQ. And the environmental agency was brought on by the health authority very early in the days of source water protection for Oregon to recognizing that the Safe Drinking Water Act authorities do not prevent pollution in source waters. And that's where we are really working, is before water hits the well, the intake, or the spring that provides that public water supply, that water systems have to meet water quality regulations for the Safe Drinking Water Act, no matter what that source water is. And by bringing in DEQ, who's the Clean Water Act agency in Oregon, we can implement some of those protections and help water systems with both reducing their treatment costs and protecting, public health. So our program is fully funded by that local assistance and other state programs set aside. Oregon has chosen to take the full set aside for drinking water source protection, and then the land and the capacity program do those together. And in Oregon, source water protection is 100%, well, it's voluntary for public water systems to implement. So we do a lot of technical assistance and outreach to get water systems and others both, informed, educated, and on board with, recognizing that those watersheds and aquifers are really that first line of defense. Can move ahead. And I'll pass it off to Laura to talk about how we sort of really interact with the Clean Water SRF and our non-point source program.
Hey there. So I'm here to share a little bit of the story behind how our drinking water source protection program started working collaboratively with Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. And I want to recognize that drinking water source protection work often relies on understanding what the available funding resources are for a given project, and then being able to think creatively to identify and layer funding opportunities to get projects happening on the ground. In 2023, I read a newsletter from the Oregon Clean Water SRF program, and it highlighted upcoming changes to the program, including increased levels of principal forgiveness for eligible projects and borrowers, and also a new opportunity wherein planning loans of up to $100,000 could receive up to 100% principal forgiveness. I was admittedly not familiar with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund as a funding mechanism, and I was instantly curious about what types of source water protection projects could be eligible for that funding. So to figure out the overlap between drinking water source protection projects and Clean Water SRF funding, I contacted the Clean Water SRF program, and I initiated a conversation to understand what projects were a good fit. The resulting conversations that our program had with Clean Water State Revolving Fund staff, they happened over email, in virtual meetings, and we actually together created a shared document that our program first outlined what source water protection projects we thought would be eligible based on our preliminary conversations with their staff. And then we invited Clean Water State Revolving Fund staff to review and comment on that document to further clarify what is a good project, what types of projects are eligible, or maybe not so much. In Oregon, the Drinking Water Source Protection Program is co-located at the Department of Environmental Quality with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. And that's been a variable that's helped facilitate program coordination and collaboration. We can easily share documents or files via our agency's cloud-based server and shared network. We can Teams chat one another, and we can even check one another's calendar before scheduling a meeting. The result of these efforts is that our programs have a better mutual understanding of one another, and we can jointly provide more robust technical assistance to serve communities. Our drinking water source protection program staff are able to discuss Clean Water State Revolving Fund project opportunities and eligible project types with the communities that we're interacting with as part of our technical assistance work. And we can then refer them to the program directly to learn more. And Clean Water SRF staff have actually looped in our drinking water source protection program staff when they receive loan information request forms or applications that have a source water protection nexus. And one additional outcome of this coordination is the identification of what types of projects are a particularly good fit for Clean Water SRF funding. And in particular, we found that projects that are too costly or large to fit within Oregon's limited drinking water state revolving fund set-aside funding program, or projects involving land conservation, are good fits. And we've also recently been suggesting Clean Water SRF funding for eligible planning projects due to the historic levels of principal forgiveness that have been available. Slide. Another important program to mention is Oregon's non-point source program. In the drinking water source protection program, we recognize the importance of coordinating with our state's non-point source program. Both of these programs have the shared goal of preventing and reducing water pollution from diffuse sources across the landscape in order to protect water quality for human health and for ecosystem health. And in Oregon, the non-point source management program plan guides statewide priorities and funding decisions, including project eligibilities for Section 319 and Clean Water SRF funding. So our program engages actively with non-point source program staff and their planning process to ensure that source water protection priorities are incorporated in Oregon's non-point source management plan, and thereby we can ensure those project types are eligible for Clean Water Act funding opportunities. And person who was asking about Clean Water SRF eligibility in Florida, that's what I thought about, is having a better understanding of how does Florida or any state that you may be in, how are the decisions made about what's prioritized in these Clean Water Act funding streams or not? And that would be the opportunity to plug in and try to advocate for something different in the prioritization or planning process. Slide. And now we're going to share some Oregon examples.
Yes. So I know Allison went over this a little bit earlier, but in case you missed that, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund has been around since the late 1980s, helping communities, I know, across the country and specifically in Oregon. And so the program provides low interest loans to communities for projects that help protect and improve water quality. So when I'm out speaking with communities and they have questions around non-point source projects and I don't have ready examples, something I say will be is if the project has a clean water benefit, this is a great place to start thinking of, is this eligible or not? Because the eligibilities are quite broad. And so that way, starting with the clean water benefit nexus can help at least be a starting place for communities to learn more about, is this a funding source that can be used for this project or not? Next slide, please. Now we're going to go into the specific examples of the types of projects we've been working with.
Yeah, so I'm going to start by sharing some information about the city of Port Orford. It's a small and rural community located in coastal Curry County in the southwestern corner of Oregon. And the city provides drinking water to less than 1,200 residents from the North Fork of Hubbard Creek, which is a small watershed, approximately 630 acres in size. In addition to having a limited ratepayer base, the community has a high poverty rate, and over 40% of the population is of 65 years of age or older. And the city has had a longstanding recognition of the importance of promoting resilient watershed conditions. This was spurred by a landslide in the watershed that happened in the 1990s. This landslide occurred the winter following a clear-cut timber harvest operation that happened above their drinking water reservoir and intake. And that landslide resulted in the city losing their drinking water source for over a year, and also kickstarted the city's efforts to opportunistically buy land in the watershed. The city relies on raw water storage in their intake reservoir during the summer when flows are lowest and demand is highest. But high sedimentation rates in the upper watershed have been infilling that reservoir rapidly. And this results in reduced water storage capacity, increased operations and maintenance costs to dredge that reservoir. And in addition, the city's treatment plant is very sensitive to turbidity, and the city will preferentially shut down their intake when raw turbidity climbs to above 5 NTU in response to winter storms. The source water assessment completed for the city identified many of the streams in their source water areas at high risk of erosion in response to disturbance, including most of the streams located on the parcel that the city did end up using Clean Water State Revolving Funds to purchase. So what about the parcel? In 2021, the local watershed council was active in the area and alerted the city to an upcoming timber harvest on the 160-acre parcel. And through conversations with the landowner, they determined that the private owner was open to selling the land instead of moving forward with the harvest. However, the land transaction needed to happen quickly, and the city partnered with a national land trust called the Conservation Fund as a bridge buyer. That meant that the Conservation Fund purchased the land from the private seller and held it for the city. And the city entered into a real estate services agreement, agreeing to purchase the land from the Conservation Fund within a certain amount of time. If the city were unable to purchase the land in that time frame, the Conservation Fund would put the land up for sale in the open market. Next slide. This is a highlight of the timeline of events for the city's land acquisition project, and it highlights a few important points. First, the city was able to access funding through Oregon's Drinking Water Source Protection Fund grant program that helped pave the way for the project to occur. This Source Protection Fund grant program is funded through Oregon's Drinking Water State Revolving Fund set-aside. Eligible project types broadly include anything that reduces risk to a community public water system's drinking water source, and there is no match requirement. The city of Port Orford received a Source Protection Fund grant in 2021, the same year that they entered into their real estate services agreement with the Conservation Fund, so that they could develop a forest stewardship plan for the 160-acre parcel of land. In Oregon, as in I think most states, the Clean Water SRF loans require planning documents. For land conservation project types, this looks like a management plan for the parcel of land that details the management strategies that will be followed to protect drinking water sources and prevent non-point source pollution from entering surface or groundwater. The resultant management plan helps demonstrate how the project meets priorities identified in Oregon's non-point source management plan and meet clean water goals. And for this land acquisition project, the property was initially purchased by the Conservation Fund in 2021 and successfully transferred to city ownership some 3 years later in 2024 with funding from a Clean Water SRF non-point source loan. These types of projects take time to complete, although one of the first attempts at land conservation in a drinking water source area in Oregon was for a different community, the community of Arch Cape. And that project took over 10 years to complete and notably did not utilize Clean Water SRF funding. So I think we're getting better maybe over time as we do more of these projects. Slide.
So a little bit about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund details. So when looking at this project, it was important that, as mentioned earlier, this project as submitted on the application met the non-point source management plan goals, and they emphasized the reduction of stream sedimentation and emphasized all of the different water quality benefits that would happen as a result of city's ownership of this parcel. So that is how the community ensured that their project was aligned with our program. It also qualified, Allison mentioned earlier, the Green Project Reserve categories that EPA requires for CWSRF as a program. And so this qualified under the environmentally innovative project category. And then they received $826,015 through CWSRF and $413,008 were awarded as principal forgiveness. So about half the loan funding was done in.
Somebody did that?
I just
Like
clicked
magic.
record. So let's see.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, well, thank you all listening for technical errors, but we're back and I'll progress to the next slide because there were a lot of lessons learned. So some first key lessons on a very logistical basis was we had to work together to confirm if the city as a borrower had any other existing loans being repaid for our program in Oregon, this may not apply to all states. We have it in our loan agreements that our Department of Justice approves, that the CWSRF loan needs to be paid back first. So we had to work with colleagues to make sure that that was going to happen. Another additional consideration and lesson learned from this project was that operations and maintenance costs can really, so CWSRF loans cannot cover costs for operations and maintenance. And so when submitting an application, it is important for, at least in Oregon, for the community to outline that in addition to the land acquisition, there will be future, like to delineate what the future management plan looks like and have those as distinct projects. Otherwise, it would look as ongoing operations and maintenance of the land acquisition property. Planning documents are required for a CWSRF loan, like we all previously discussed. There are various requirements based on states for what types of planning documents would be acceptable, especially as it relates to non-point source. So I provided a link on this slide for what our project planning documents look like here in Oregon. But please check in with your local CWSRF contacts to learn more about what those would look like in your state. Our program also, not all CWSRFs require an environmental review for all of their projects that have design or construction. And since our program has not often funded land acquisition, we did not have an application type for land acquisition. We only have design and construction loan applications. So we learned that in coordination with EPA, we would have the ability to waive certain environmental review requirements since this project was not a design or construction project. Therefore, some of those environmental review components did not apply. Other lessons learned was in Oregon, all borrowers for the CWSRF program have a regional project officer. And so when it came to specifics of the real estate transaction details, our finance team and our project officer needed to make sure that they received that information in order to make the loan move forward and for our finance staff to be able to do the underwriting. We also really want to emphasize that something that was critical was the landowner agreements. So depending on the circumstances, in this case where the bridge buyer was needed to move at that expedited pace, it was important for our program's finance team to have copies of those landowner agreements prior to making the loan. And then in Oregon, the CWSRF program typically operates on a reimbursement basis. And so we, once we received this project, we were creative and flexible to meet their needs. However, it's something to check logistically moving forward within your state to see how projects receive their loans once the loan agreements are signed and how that disbursement goes. Next, and yeah, Laura.
All right, I'm gonna take everybody through another project that is ongoing in their efforts to access Clean Water State Revolving Fund monies for a land conservation initiative, and that is the city of Rockaway Beach. The city of Rockaway Beach is currently in the process of pursuing Clean Water State Revolving funding to help acquire land in their Jetty Creek drinking water source watershed. And the city of Rockaway Beach is located on Oregon's north coast in Tillamook County. The city is small, with a population of around 1,500 people, although in the peak of summer tourism season, this population routinely triples to over 4,500. And peak water demand coincides with the dry summer season when stream flows are lowest. If you all didn't know, we have a Mediterranean climate here in Oregon, and it is very wet during the winter and fall months, and we don't get any rain typically over the summer and sometimes fall, like into the fall, just no precipitation. So the Jetty Creek watershed is approximately 1,300 acres in size. and at least historically has been 100% privately owned and managed for industrial timber production. And over a 20-year period, more than 90% of this watershed was clear-cut harvested, and this resulted in increased turbidity, sediment, and organics being transported downstream to the city's drinking water intake. The city's drinking water treatment plant was routinely experiencing disinfection byproduct exceedances as a result of that, and it led the city to install an expensive treatment upgrade at the plant that were paid for by ratepayers. This was the spur for a locally led community effort in Rockaway Beach, wherein citizens were advocating for public ownership of the watershed and community-led management to support drinking water quality. Slide. So as I mentioned, prior to 2023, there was already a locally led community effort advocating for public ownership in the Jetty Creek watershed. And in response to this community demand, in 2023, the Rockaway Beach Water District applied for and received one of our state's grants through the Drinking Water Source Protection Fund to develop a drinking water protection plan and to complete some initial land conservation planning tasks. For this community, it was important to go through a planning process with public engagement to create a plan that included land conservation as a prioritized strategy to pursue. Drinking water protection planning is not a requirement for water systems to complete in Oregon. And one reason that communities or water systems would pursue this is to get public buy-in and especially public official buy-in before pursuing a given source water protection strategy. So with that process underway, in 2024, the city received another Drinking Water Source Protection Fund grant to develop a forest stewardship plan for the Jetty Creek watershed to complete other planning tasks related to acquiring land. And in 2025, the city's technical assistance partner, Sustainable Northwest, was awarded $40,000 through an EPA funding opportunity to assist with project management costs, including assisting the city to apply for and access implementation funding for this land conservation project. This included supporting the city to submit a Clean Water State Revolving Fund non-point source loan application. Slide.
Yeah. So as Laura mentioned, this the Jetty Creek watershed acquisition was to purchase 800 acres of forest land, including the 600 acres that directly drain into the Jetty Creek. And so once again, this is an opportunity that allows the city to have local control over the watershed management to protect water quality at the source. And so in their application, in addition to some of the other benefits similar to the City of Port Orford's project, the City of Rockaway Beach included the prevention of non-point source pollution before it reaches the water system. So they also highlighted the benefit of reducing future treatment and infrastructure costs in their application. And this was a $5 million loan with $2 million in principal forgiveness with an interest rate of 2.07%, and it's another 30-year loan term. And so again, this is protecting critical forest land that naturally filters and stores water. So the community made sure to emphasize that benefit in their application. And once again, it demonstrates how Clean Water State Revolving Fund can support like proactive source water protection and long-term community resilience. And as Laura mentioned, this was a real grassroots effort by the community to move forward.
We have one more land acquisition project we wanted to highlight, and it's for the city of Reedsport. They are looking to acquire a parcel of land in their Clear Lake watershed. And we wanted to emphasize this because the city historically had owned about 20% of the land in the watershed already. It was like from the early 1900s, around the time that the water right was first established. So they had this existing city land, and our Drinking Water Source Protection Program held a workshop series on the coast in 2022. And this water system and community participated in that workshop, and they actually invited everybody to come out and check out the land that they owned around Clear Lake. And as part of that conversation, there was this sort of aha moment for the community of, oh, wait, like we own this forest land. You mean there could actually be risk involved in not actively managing it? They had this land and weren't doing anything to manage the forest. And there was a conversation around, overstocked forest stands and wildfire risk, invasive species, just like a myriad of things to think about when you're managing a forest for resiliency, and not doing any management is a choice, and there can be risks involved in that. So it actually initiated the city in applying for one of the state's Source Protection Fund grants to do a forest stewardship plan for the city-owned land. But it also spurred a conversation about this parcel of land, the last remaining privately owned parcel that encompasses arm of Clear Lake. On the map, it's this like square reddish block with the hatch marks. And the city has been engaged in an effort to purchase that land, and the project is moving towards completion. It's very exciting. It's another small community, less than 5,000 people, serving unincorporated communities and a rural part of Oregon's south coast. And notably, they have one of the last remaining unfiltered treatment plants in the state. And that unfiltered treatment plant is extremely sensitive to changes in raw water turbidity. And the most recent estimate, if they were to need to have to install filtration because of changes in source water quality, it's like over $7 million to put that in place at the treatment plant. Whereas the cost of the acquisition to just purchase and protect the land is much less.
And so, sorry. Yeah, so the community took out a loan for $1 million in CWSRF funding, and that included $500,000 in principal forgiveness. And once again, this loan, based on the community size and the loan term, had a loan term of 30 years with a 2.07% interest rate. And this provided affordable financing for the land acquisition. And once again, it's an opportunity that the city is moving forward with to leverage funding alongside those existing grants that they received to reduce that cost that their community would face. And now we're going to talk about another type of non-point source project that happens here in Oregon's Clean Water State Revolving Fund. We call these local community loans. And so a little bit about the project background. So Clackamas County has a soil and water conservation district, and water providers and the Oregon Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. They had an existing rebate program that could not cover the full costs of major repairs or replacements for septic systems. And so water providers identified a need for additional financing to assist those homeowners with failing septic systems. Now, in Oregon, similar to many CWSRFs, we cannot lend to private entities. So several years prior to the water providers and the drinking water SRF folks having this conversation, Clackamas County Soil and Water Conservation District had been using a local community loan where they, as the Soil and Water Conservation District, applied a CWSRF for initial funding, saying the types of projects they will do. We then issue them a large lump sum of a loan, so to speak, and then Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District, they then have the ability to then make loans from their existing loan fund. So they're able to distribute that funds to those private homeowners identified based on criteria set up by their district. So they've been having success doing these small loans to help with farmers do agricultural best management practice projects as well as irrigation projects. So they already had this existing local community loan structure set up with DEQ's CWSRF program, and the water providers identified this need. So they all came together, and Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District expanded their existing revolving loan program to include septic system repairs and replacements. So now this district can still receive CWSRF funding, and then based on criteria that are established within their own local program, they're able to lend to again, private entities for now, septic system repair and replacements to protect source water throughout their, and just protect water sources more broadly throughout their jurisdiction. So through the CWSRF local community loan, they were able to establish its own revolving loan program to support water quality improvements. And this program provides similar benefits as the CWSRF. So they are able to provide interest-free or low-interest loans for these homeowners interested in repairing or replacing their failing septic systems. And they're also continuing to support farmers and irrigation districts by implementing water conservation projects as well. So this project is really exciting for our program because it helps with a lot of different water quality and water quantity benefits. And then through the local community loan, it enables a low interest revolving microloan system specifically for the septic system repair and replacement. And it expands that access beyond traditional rebate limits, and it strengthens local capacity for this soil and water conservation district to fund ongoing water quality improvements in their district. And it is a self-sustaining loan structure. And now we'll talk a little bit about planning loans and how our two programs have been able to work and advance those.
Probably a high-level overview here as we're running short on time.
Yeah, so the high level is that Seal Rock applied for one of the state grants to do a drinking water protection plan, and they fell below the funding line. And because of the collaborative work that we did with Clean Water SRF, we had identified jointly that drinking water protection planning would be an eligible project type. And I was in person with Seal Rock and recommended that they pursue Clean Water SRF planning loans to complete their drinking water protection plan, which led to them submitting an application for it. Next slide.
Yeah, and so I will summarize. This was during our CWSRF program was still working off of the IJA bill funding. So our principal forgiveness limits were quite expansive. And so the financing of this project, they came in with a $50,000 request for their 5-year implementation plan. And so our planning loans, if eligible, where we were able to issue up to 100% of principal forgiveness, up to $100,000. So this project that came in at $50,000 was able to receive 100% principal forgiveness. And in this plan, they also included ways to do community engagement, containment source inventory, identify risks, develop actions to eliminate, reduce, and mitigate any of those contamination threats, and develop a contingency plan for water supply interruptions and an evaluation of alternative sources. And this was the first drinking water source water protection plan funded through CWSRF in Oregon. And so I just want to note for folks on the call that oftentimes first of a kind projects can take a little longer. There was a lot of back and forth consultation. We wanted to make sure we were still meeting our requirements and eligibilities, and also wanting to support the water district with this plan. So now I'll briefly provide a high-level overview of the sponsorship option, which I know Allison mentioned earlier. So there was a watershed protection project out in the Eugene Springfield area here in Oregon. It was from a Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission in partnership with the Freshwater Trust. And they were helping to finance treatment improvements, and they were interested in riparian shading. That was, again, the projects were going to be linked financially to these this point source project for treatment system improvements. So they applied and received funding for $450,000 for riparian shading. And then this was designed to achieve temperature credits towards MWMC's NPDES permit. And it was also benefiting the drinking water source for the city. And now I'll pass it off to Julie.
Great. So key tips and takeaways from sort of everybody's presentation today, but also from sort of our experience in Oregon, is really engage partners, water systems, decision makers, early and often. And for us, a lot of that engagement, especially with water systems, has been that in-person conversations, those one-on-one conversations, to let them know that this is feasible and it is something that protecting that natural infrastructure upstream of their well, their intake, or their spring is both doable and can fit into their city planning or their municipality planning. Also connecting them with those local conservation partners who are the experts in this field is critical. That really, it makes it a more local project and brings in the right people. You, advance the slide. Our Clean Water SRF program. Oh, let me just talk about a little bit about blended funding. Super important. No, go ahead. Many systems are willing to take on that debt through the land for land acquisition or a large project, but really those grants are critical for getting communities able to launch the projects, reduce that financial burden, and ensure the community benefits outweigh the costs. It's part of convincing sort of the community, their city council, their mayor, that this is a good use of those city funds. And so having those planning grants available through the Drinking Water SRF in our case, or maybe through the Clean Water SRF or other programs in your state, can be really important for that. And we've had some great, opportunities to do that. Next slide. So lessons learned, next steps for people on this call is connect with your Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. As Allison said, look at the IUP, look at the website, and then connect with them to see if you can get sort of like what are their priorities and how would these things fit into their priorities. Be looking at what the planning requirements are for fitting into that so that you can be helping water systems and others meet those planning requirements also. Next slide. So also connecting with your non-point source plan and seeing where they are in that 5-year cycle and working to get the source water protection and drinking water as a beneficial use goals plugged into that plan, as well as seeing what kind of 319 grants your state may have available. That could be available for a lot of both the projects, but also the planning. And then on the next slide, for both, really, once again, early and often for exploring partnerships, understanding those eligibility requirements, financing terms, timelines, and ranking criteria. I think the question was asked earlier, like a land trust may not be eligible, but in this case, we've got land trusts partnering with a municipality or a city or a water district to do the purchase. And so the water system does the purchase, but the land trust may be helping them manage the whole process to get to the purchase, but then afterwards they help them manage that land. So by building that partnership, we've got eligible entities that are able to apply. So get them on your team and be able to move that forward. And then just advocating for the source water protection and land conservation to be included in the program priorities across the board. And I think that's our last set of tips. Here's key contacts that'll be with your slides so that you can go and figure out who your contacts are for your state. And maybe I'll turn it back to Sylvia. I know we've tried to answer some of the questions in the chat, and maybe there's some key ones that we could help answer as we move on.
Yep, you guys did a great job. Thanks very much. And for those of you who didn't see it in the chat, our host, Kathy Hawes, lost power. So it was great recovery on everybody's part. Thank you all so much. And thank you for the great questions in the chat. I think we did, thanks to Julie, answer most of them. There were a couple that we didn't maybe. One was, is groundwater protection considered a clean water benefit? And I will say, if it's okay with everybody, we might just go over a few minutes, given the little gap that we had.
I'll let Allie take that one on. Is groundwater considered a clean water benefit?
Yeah, so it really depends. So for cleanup projects, where it's already like So groundwater protection and restoration are eligible under CWSRF project eligibilities. Specifically, groundwater projects would need to focus on protecting and restoring aquifers. And this can include things like pump and treat projects, right? Because that infrastructure, aquifer recharge projects, and projects that decrease projects that decrease aquifer withdrawals. So if there's a project that emphasizes rainwater harvesting, water conservation, or water reuse, yes. Other projects that protect groundwater include, septic system repair and replacement, other leachate control mechanisms. And a key caveat here is that they would also need to be aligned with the non-point source management plan. So in Oregon, we have not financed a groundwater protection project that is similar to how we emphasize those source water protection through land conservation acquisition. That is something that would need to be, discussed further and make sure that it aligns with existing priorities. So yeah, again, there is eligibilities around CWSRF project types related to groundwater, but for solely groundwater protection, that I don't think that alone would be eligible, at least in Oregon. But activities to protect groundwater within a broader land conservation project, like to safeguard the groundwater, such as protecting those recharge areas or preserving those riparian buffers or acquiring land to prevent overuse of an aquifer, those to me all seem eligible. So yeah, it is, but maybe check in on the specific details depending on your project and depending on the state.
Thank you. And then we had a question, is eligibility for principal forgiveness fixed same year to year and known by the applicants before they seek funding? Does principal forgiveness vary depending on type of project as opposed to just the characteristics of the applicant?
So I'll answer that for Oregon. Principal forgiveness is not guaranteed, it's not fixed, and currently our team is undergoing an evaluation of our principal forgiveness. Due to the end of the Bill IJA funding, we were able to go through a rule change and maximize our limits and increase them. And we are seeing a need due to the, again, tremendous interest from communities in Oregon's CWSRF. We are going to have to adjust those. And as for the amounts that are awarded, those are determined at the time the loan is signed. So it is a little tricky communication-wise when working with borrowers, because our staff, as well as when Laura was working hands-on with the community she mentioned, we don't know until the time of loan signing, because that's when we know how much funding is available in our larger CWSRF funding streams and what it's all behind the scenes, but whether or not we are assigning them to a capitalization grant. We have several to manage within Oregon CWSRF. And so principal forgiveness is determined by the availability of that federal funding we have. We can't say until really right as we draft the loan agreement, hey, this is what we have available for you in principal forgiveness. This is the interest rate. So those things are determined really at the end of the process in getting a loan.
But I imagine there's ballpark awareness before that.
So yeah, we have maximums available. And again, those are going to be changing in Oregon very soon as we prepare for this shift in our federal funding availability. So we can give estimates or approximations. We can say, if there's funding available at the time your loan is signed, this is what you are likely to receive. But we ask that communities do not plan on that subsidy or budget for it. Our program also really emphasizes we look at cities and public agencies when they apply for a loan to see what their financial capacity is before underwriting. So we ask for documentation such as audited financial, up to 3 years of audited financials, because we do not write the loans with the principal. We include every dollar amount. So the principal forgiveness is not part of that underwriting evaluation. when we look at a community's finances. So I recommend that communities, not just in Oregon, but again, it does vary state to state, given that principal forgiveness is so closely tied to the federal capitalization grants that each CWSRF program gets. They may or may not be fixed, but in Oregon, they're not. And we cannot say until the loan is about to be signed what that amount would be.
Okay, thank you. And then one final question. Theoretically, could annual payment in lieu of taxes payments to counties be used to repay a source water protection loan? I guess this would mean clean water SRF loan.
I think this
So
is really a really good question for both Ali and then Allison maybe as well. And I think the whole question about like what would communities use as their repayment source? Because especially for land conservation or big pollution prevention projects, the goal is not to make money, right? It's not to cut the forest and make money. So what are they using as a typical revenue source, and would this one specifically be eligible? Maybe
so
Allison might chime in there too.
yeah, I'll go first for at least Oregon. Our program, we try to be as flexible as possible with the source of repayment. So it is a conversation. We have our finance team, our project officers, and the community. And again, we look at the audited financials. So if we are noticing that, like, for example, we look oftentimes at sewer utility, like water rates, things like that. If there's other additional funding sources, like a general fund, we are open. But we do what our program needs in order to do the loan underwriting is make sure that there is a way for the community to take on the project and manage the debt and not be in any significant financial hardship in order to repay it. So I'll let Allison go from there, but I know for Oregon, we try to be as flexible as possible.
Yeah, I think that's generally the case for other states too. I don't believe there's any federal like statute or prohibition against using certain types of repayments. But I'm not quite sure in terms of payment in lieu of taxes.
Okay, thank you all. Okay, if there are any other questions in the chat, we will look at them and get back to you all when we send out the recording link, maybe 2 recording links. Thank you all for your flexibility. Thank you to all the speakers. Really great job and so much great information. We are hoping that our audience is all, I see a lot of hearts and claps there. So thank you all for earning all of that today. We hope you're energized and equipped with enough information to start this conversation within your state. We're going to be exploring opportunities to follow up with an opportunity for more discussion on this important topic. And we know it's not a one-off, really complicated topic. We will follow up, as we said, with the recording, a copy of the slides, and an announcement for our next webinar. Please sign up for the Sourcewater Collaborative and Southeastern Partnership newsletters, and our websites are listed on the last slide, which we didn't show you, but you'll see it when we send you that. I don't think we have that shown up. I'm not sure who can advance that right now, but we'll get it to you. And thank you all for being here. If you have ideas about additional topics you want to hear about, if you think follow-up on a regional basis would be helpful to talk about this more further, more in more detail, happy to do take in all those kind of ideas. And finally, I do want to thank Julie Harvey for joining us today, because she is transitioning out of the Oregon DEQ program, and we're all going to miss her a lot, obviously. And we're really happy that we got a chance to get her on tape with her expertise for this last webinar.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Thanks, everybody. You all were really super great, and thanks for your patience. Kathy, it felt terrible, but things happen with your electricity that you don't control, unfortunately. So please communicate with us, though, about other things you want to hear about. And does anybody else want to offer any final comments before we close out? Okay. I will let the recording people stop the recording. And thanks so much. And we'll look forward to catching up with you all soon. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.